Manly McCauley, an 18-year-old farmhand, victim of racial terror lynching. Manly McCauley never got the chance to grow into full adulthood and enjoy life. Reminiscent of the brutal murder of James Cates on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill, where a marker now stands in his memory. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. And welcome to this historical occasion of remembrance for Manly McCauley. I want to thank the Equal Justice Initiative, the Town of Carrboro and its staff, and the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition for the partnership that came together to commemorate the life and tragic death of one Manly McCauley. Humanize him. Let's all say his name. Manly McCauley. Again, welcome.
I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Eno, the Tutelo, the Saponi, the Occaneechi, and the Shakari people. You are welcome here. We're gathered here today on the land that was traditionally part of the territory of the Saponi people in the Piedmont of what is now the state of North Carolina. This area is not far from the great trading path used by both the native people of this area and non-native people during the early years of contact. The Saponi people, whose descendants include the Occaneechi band of the Saponi Nation tribe, still thrive and live in this region, officially recognized by the state government of North Carolina. The Occaneechi are connected to this land, spiritually and physically. It provided all we needed to sustain our communities. We hunted in the forest, fished in the streams, and grew our crops in the woodland clearings. We hunted in the forest, fished in the streams, and grew our crops in the woodland clearings. We picked the wild grapes, gathered the acorns, harvested the poplar bark, and built our homes. We raised our children and protected our families. We are bonded and one with this land, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It flows within our veins. Despite how the landscape has changed, regardless of the concrete, asphalt, and steel that covers it today, it is still our home, and the bones of our ancestors sleep in this part of Mother Earth. As we come here together today, do not forget that our people love this land. Although most of you who live and work on it today have little knowledge of our past and present existence, we did not willingly sell or willingly vacate the land, so it remains in our hearts. As the great Chief Seattle said, every part of the earth is sacred to my people. Every shining pine needle, every sandy shore, every mist in the dark woods, every meadow, every humming insect. All are holy in the memory and the experience of my people. This land does not belong to the man. We belong to the land. The Occaneechi people, the Yesa, ask that you will keep these thoughts in mind while here in place and treated with respect, love, and care that our ancestors did, and as we do so today. Our hope is that we all exist, acknowledge this sacred land together and in a good way. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, there's a slight change to our program, and we have our U.S. representative, Congresswoman Valerie Foushee, here to say a few words.
Good afternoon. I deeply commend the efforts of the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition, the Equal Justice Initiative, and the Town of Carrboro for leading this important initiative. And we especially appreciate the presence of the relatives of Mr. Manly McCauley for taking the time to be here and joining us this afternoon. I had the occasion almost 2 years ago to participate in a like ceremony in Chatham County for the remembrance of Eugene Daniels, who suffered the same sort of treatment here in the great North State. And following that situation, I had the opportunity to attend a Faith and Politics tour where we toured the Civil Rights Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and had the opportunity to see the soul that represented that soul. So I'm so grateful for this opportunity to join you today as we gather to somewhat solemnly recognize and honor the life of Manly McCauley, a victim of racial hate and violence, who was tragically lynched right here in Orange County nearly 126 years ago. The lynchings of over 4,000 victims nationwide, including over 120 reported right here in North Carolina, are indeed a stain on our nation's history. And we still feel the immense pain generations later. But monuments and markers like we'll see today help us to reckon with our past and honors the victims by cementing their legacies in our history. I believe that the federal government has a role and a responsibility in correcting historical wrongs. And last Congress, the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act was signed into law, finally making lynching a federal hate crime. And as you heard from Mayor Foushee, the University of North Carolina had finally acknowledged its complicity in that death. And though it was long overdue, this was a huge step in the right direction in correcting historic injustices and acknowledging our nation's painful past. Racial violence is a horrific part of our past, but unfortunately it is still a part of our present, and we must continue telling the truth, the full history, no matter how painful it is. Please, my friends, please make it your responsibility to teach our history such that we can safeguard that these atrocities do not continue. The importance of this cannot be overstated, and it is critical for us to confront and dismantle the darkest parts of our past for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. So thank you all again, and everybody who was involved in this important effort. The fight for true equality and justice remains, and let us continue to come together to preserve the truths of our past as we work to build a safer, more inclusive, and just future for all.
All right, I am North Carolina, the state representative, Renée Price. Carter G. Woodson, known as the father of Black History Month, once said, "If a race lacks history and tradition, it risks obscurity and extinction." You, by gathering here today, are assuring that African Americans and our history is known, understood, and appreciated. By saying their names, Manly McCauley, Cyrus Guy, Daniel Morrow, Jefferson Morrow, Washington Morrow, and Wright Woods Malone, we celebrate them and the lives they lived. By placing their names on historical markers, we acknowledge their stories of suffering and sacrifice at the hands of racial terror, lynching, and inhumane injustice. The Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition began in 2018, soon after the Equal Justice Initiative opened its National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. We began as a group of 5 concerned organizations and individuals, and since then, approximately 24 nonprofits, governments, agencies, and individuals have participated in remembering the lives of African American men, women, and yes, children murdered in Orange County from 1865 to 1940 due to racial terror lynching. Our first soil collection, the one from Manly McCauley, was in November 2018, and soil collections for Cyrus Guy, the Morrows, and Woods Malone occurred last year in April. We also have hosted and partnered with local organizations to offer film screenings and educational programs on lynching and related issues on race relations. More events and ceremonies are on the horizon. Diane Jackson is working on the essay contest for high school students, which should occur later this spring. And we hope to have another marker installation and unveiling on county property in Hillsborough, perhaps this autumn. At this time, I would like to acknowledge my fellow co-chairs, Dr. Freddie Parker, right here, Sally Freeman, who's in the back, and Judge Hathaway Pendergrass. Members of the Marker Committee who have worked on this program include our chair, Diane Robertson, Jen Weaver, Leon Temney, who's unable to be here, along with Charlotte White. We thank immensely Carrboro Town staff, headed by Anita Jones-McNair, who are responsible for the installation of the marker that you will see later, and staff from the Chapel Hill Public Library and the Orange County Visitors Bureau. We have other elected officials joining us today, and if you're here, please raise your hand. Thank you. From all levels of government. And current and past members of the coalition, please raise your hands, and thank you for sustaining this effort. Quite a few of you. We extend our gratitude also to our program participants, Beverly Payne, from the Occaneechi Band of the Occaneechi Band of the Pony Nation. I didn't get that right yet. Occaneechi Pony Band. Yeah, I got it. Dr. Reginald Hildebrand, whom you hear from later, and Brown Sugar String. Old City Music. And for those that you may not be able to see them, these are 4 young women that are on the string. They're led by Janetta Hopkins. I also want to welcome our very special guest, Jennifer Harris, whom you'll hear from later, from the Equal Justice Initiative, and Adrienne Nerde from the African American Heritage Commission. And a very special welcome to the distant relatives of Manly McCauley. To learn more about the coalition, to join our email list, or to donate, please look in your program for the QR code as well as the website address. We invite you to join us as we tell the truth about American history, the truth about Orange County history. Truth leads to reconciliation, and through reconciliation, we can work towards justice and peace. Now, I am pleased to introduce once former Chapel Hill Poet Laureate, CJ Suitt. Poet, arts educator, and community organizer. Come on up, and as you're coming up, I'll just say that it's through the arts, and many of you may know that I am an arts lover. Through the arts and our cultural traditions and even historic preservation, we connect the past to the present. We strengthen the foundation for future generations, and we express our deepest thoughts and emotions. So I am delighted to present to you CJ Suitt.
I will start by just saying that in Black culture we know that physical death is only a part of things, right? And that we live on as long as folks have remembered us and continue to say our names. And that came to me because I always tend to start things with a selection from a poem by Lucille Clifton that's called Come Celebrate With Me. And the poem starts with the two lines, come celebrate with me what I have built into some kind of life. And we fast forward to the end of the poem where she says, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And this February in Black History Month, I just want to let Manly McCauley know myself, and I would hope that we are letting him know in this moment that they tried to kill you, but they failed. Because we remember. Yes. We remember. We remember. Yes. Yeah. Y'all who might not know much about me, we're not always sort of in these moments as poets. We're often called to remember moments or do poems about things that we have a distant relationship to. But for me, I grew up in a little neighborhood called Councilville, off 54 West, off of Hatch Road. All Black neighborhood that still exists today. My parents still live in that neighborhood, and I drove past this site for many years, and didn't know about it until my adulthood. And so I'm particularly familiar with this place and have been familiar with the energy of this place. And so this piece I'm going to share with you all today is from that perspective, an intimate perspective with place and particularly the history. 1, my childhood home. In the neighborhood called Councilville off Hatch Road, which is off Old Greensboro Road, as a kid, the specter looms large, fills the night with anxiety. Looking through the rearview window, I used to think there were ghosts chasing the car. My family calls them haints. Felt like they were reaching out to take me in the night air. I would tell myself we're almost home. I'm safe with the windows up, away from the breeze that beckons. We fear what we do not understand. It's all ghost stories and dead names. 2, there are shadows here. I can and have always been able to feel them. In high school, I drive past Neville Road. My aunt lives on Sesame Road. I party with college students on Brewer Lane. When I'm without insurance, I visit a free clinic on Lloyd Street. All names no one has cared to mention or contextualize in my history class, but I mention them monthly at the least. Sometimes daily or weekly, they spill out of my mouth easy, my dialect a selective amnesia, forgetting with every syllable 3. As an adult, I learned the genealogy of the specter, about a young man, love and savior, too loud in his ears to keep him from becoming a wind chime made of shell casings, hanging from a dogwood tree, where my friend's car got stuck on a snow day in '97, just a mile from where I grew up, where my parents still live, where I went to church every Sunday. This is not the first time a Black man has fell in love with progress and tried to elope with it. Save the idea of freedom from an abusive relationship for a people that would see him in chains. How do we live what we say in this integrated world? Like, really live what we say. When it gets hard to, when our friends rally around and tell us to fight against someone and not for something for. Now that we know this history, what will we do with it? How will we shape our world to remember real freedom fighters instead of lynch mobs, dreamers instead of overseers when I drive down Hatch Road now? Leaving or arriving to a neighborhood called Councilville, the specter offers a solemn invitation. Fills the night drives with remembrance. I roll the windows down, take in the night air. You cannot heal in a vacuum of selective amnesia. I say his name, Manly McCauley. Reach out to take in his memory. Listen for what he is still saying. There is no fear here, just the continued work of understanding.
I'm Diane Robertson. Many of you are friends, members of my congregation, member of the other communities and activities that had brought me to Carrboro 31 years ago. I thought I knew what I was going to say, and I will say what I was going to say, but I just have to share this. You know, I'm a believer, a person of faith. And when I was asked to put this program together with Renée, you know, we had a template and we said, okay, we'll have this, this, and this. But who would fill the program was not necessarily known. And there were other poets whose names came up. And I said, you know, I think we should ask CJ. I did not know that CJ lived in the area that this incident took place in. So the Holy Spirit is here with us and defining this experience for all of us, whatever your faith experience is or is not. So thank you, CJ.
Very good.
I think Manly is here. In fact, he is. I know he is. The public narrative of a nation creates about what is important. The public narrative a nation creates about what is important is reflected in memorials and monuments. Who is honored, what is remembered, what is memorialized, tells a story about a society that can't be reflected in other ways. Bryan Stevenson, the executive director and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, those are his words. It is so gratifying to see you all here today, a day which has been a long time coming since the soil collection of Manly McCauley in November of 2019. I want to express deep appreciation for the coalition members, community volunteers, and especially for the research of Mike Ogle that was critical in securing the marker we will unveil later. And you have a booklet, I hope you have a booklet, we may have run out, but you have a booklet that has that research and the full story in it. We are one of the community coalitions whose work with the Equal Justice Initiative is to bring a fuller story of our past. If there are members of the Community Remembrance Coalition of Chatham today, would you raise your hands? I invited them to come because they are doing this work too. We are all in this to learn, as there can be no reconciliation and healing without remembering the past. This public history is all the more important as the teaching of the whole story of this country is being edited from our educational institutions, some not far from where I stand. 1898 was a bitter year in North Carolina. It was an election year, marked by division, polarization, and fueled by mainstream journalism. It was the year that Manly McCauley was lynched within a few miles of here. It was the year that the only coup that took place in the country happened in Wilmington, North Carolina, 11 days later. The cause for emancipation and freedom remains central to our story, as there is a through line from captive to Middle Passage, to enslavement, to terror murder, to mass incarceration, which has come to define a current and insidious condition in the United States. We are fortunate that the esteemed Professor Hildebrand said yes when I asked him to be our keynote speaker for the recognition of the life of Manly McCauley, for his murder is a significant part of this community, state, and country. I asked Dr. Hildebrand what I should say in my introduction, and he was far too modest, but I will respect his wishes. He served as a co-chair of the North Carolina Freedom Park Board of Directors and is a past trustee of the North Carolina Humanities Council. In addition, he was a member of the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission and served on the Historic Civil Rights Commemoration Task Force of the town of Chapel Hill. He taught African American Studies and History at UNC Chapel Hill, Williams College, and Durham Technical Community College. I associate teaching, scholarship, and faith with Dr. Hildebrand, as I met him years ago when he was on a panel on the history of the Episcopal Church in Orange County. You can learn more about his research from a Duke University Press publication of his book, The Times Were Strange and Stirring: Methodist Preachers and the Crisis of Emancipation. Thank you, Dr. Hildebrand.
And I thank you, Diane, for the honor to be a part of this occasion. As our great representative was making her remarks, it brought to mind the fact that one of her predecessors, George White, during one of the last acts of his when he was in Congress, knowing that he was going to be the last black congressperson for a long time, the last one from this state for almost over 90 years, one of his last acts, just a year and a half after the event that we are memorializing today, was to present an anti-lynching bill to the Congress. It never got out of committee. I don't think he even expected much to happen with it. But as he was leaving, as he said, he knew that he was passing the torch to persons like our present congressperson, and we are so proud that she represents us in the way that she does. 18-year-old Manly McCauley was loved by the family that raised him and sent him out into the world. In 1898, the year he was lynched, his parents, David and Luvena, were in their mid-40s. He had 3 older sisters. So Manly was the baby of the family and the only boy, his mama's baby boy. When he was growing up, he probably got lots of attention. There were probably times when he felt that he was the center of the universe. Then, as a young man, he worked on the farm of Milton and Maggie Brewer. At age 27 or 28, Maggie Brewer was about 10 years his senior, and in 1898, she had been married for 10 years. She had 3 young children, ages 10, 6, and 3. She was unhappy in her marriage and left her husband several times and went to stay with her parents on their nearby farm. She always went back until one Wednesday in October of that year, a report appearing in the news of Chapel Hill said that on October 26, she had what it described as a tantrum. And this time, when her father told her to go back to her husband, she said, "I never expect to go back, and I shall never spend another night under your roof." What happened then was reported in several newspapers, and I will quote from them verbatim. "Last Wednesday afternoon, Mrs. Milton Brewer, wife of a substantial farmer of Orange County, eloped from the home of her husband with Manly McCauley, a young Negro, 18 years old. All the neighbors were roused and the next morning a party was made up to go after them. The whole country this side of Jonesboro was searched. The party went to Jonesboro and reached the house in which the elopers had sought shelter. The pursuing party procured a conveyance for the woman, and she was sent home. And the Negro was tied and marched out of town. The Negro was taken part of the distance back, but disappeared, as those who were along put it, before he reached Chapel Hill. Nobody can be found who will tell anything as to his whereabouts. Many suspect that Judge Lynch has been at work. The Negroes in this section demand information as to the whereabouts of McCauley and threaten trouble if it is not forthcoming. About a week after McCauley disappeared and was lynched, this item appeared in the news. The dead body of Manly McCauley was found 3 miles west of Chapel Hill late yesterday afternoon. That was the afternoon of Sunday, November 6th. And then the article goes on to explain what had happened a week earlier. McCauley was lynched by a crowd which took him from the posse that was bringing him here. The body was swinging from the limb of a tree, with the dead man's toes just touching the ground. The work was skillfully done. The article said the work was skillfully done. Now, we don't know all the circumstances, but it appears that this young man had used some very poor judgment. But he did not kidnap anyone or coerce them to do anything against their will. He did not harm anyone or steal anything. He was not even accused of any of those things. Yet, he paid with his life for crossing a line, for violating the racial code of the South. The papers said there was a lesson in all of this, but it was not about the illegality and immorality of lynching, not about the murder that had taken place. No, the lesson was about race and politics, or more precisely, the politics of race. Manly McCauley's body was left hanging from a dogwood tree for about 10 days altogether. It was discovered on November 6th, but was not taken down until after the election that took place on November 8th. Just knowing it was there was a horrific symbol and reminder to people as they went to the polls. Keep in mind that in 1898, the Republican Party was regarded as the party of Lincoln and emancipation and civil rights. And the Democratic Party sought to exclude black people from politics and from the rights and protections of citizenship. Milton Brewer, Maggie's husband, was a Republican. Some thought he had it coming. Again, I quote from newspaper accounts, "There is a lesson in this for white people. Orange County people who have heretofore been Republicans are coming over to the white man's party, declaring that there must be Anglo-Saxon supremacy. Shame on a man who would jeopardize his own family by associating and mixing up with Negroes." let every Democrat go to the polls on the 8th of November and vote for white supremacy and good government. The day after the vote, the paper reported a Democratic victory in Orange County, and in the very next sentence it said, "The body of the Negro who was lynched near here has not been taken down from the tree where it was hung." A trial of sorts was held in Hillsborough because Stephen Alston, the uncle of Manly McCauley, pressed charges against 5 individuals, including Milton Brewer. The newspaper said all the defendants were promptly acquitted of the charges. The jury agreed that McCauley came to his death from hanging by parties unknown. There were 2 bold responses to this tragic story that have stuck with me. First, the response of the Black community that demanded information about what had happened to McCauley and threatened trouble if it was not forthcoming. They had not been terrorized into silent submission. And then there was Stephen Alston, McCauley's uncle, his mother's brother, a man who stood up and pressed charges against the men he had reason to believe killed his nephew, knowing that by doing so he was putting his own life and livelihood in jeopardy, knowing that the chances of getting convictions were slim to none. Still, he stood and said, "That's my nephew, and his life meant something, and I will not let this pass. I will not let you pretend that nothing of consequence has happened or that you don't know who did it." As it turned out, Maggie Brewer went back to her husband. They had another child, and she lived to be 85 years old. Mike Okel's important research, and excellent research, for which I am grateful. His research on this lynching has been very helpful to me. He did not find a grave site or a headstone for Manly McCauley. We hope that a funeral was held and that a pastor delivered a eulogy and that the community did what it could to try to comfort his mother, who had experienced more hurt than any mother's heart could hold. That's part of our unfinished business. The historic marker that we are dedicating here today will also serve as a marker to honor and remember a life, like a headstone. And today, we honor and pay respects to his family. Today, this whole diverse community is saying, that was our nephew. That was our son. And his life and this history matters. And we will not let it be forgotten.
Yes.
As Ms. Robinson stated, my name is Jennifer Harris, and I'm on staff at the Equal Justice Initiative. We're extremely proud of the work that has taken place here in Orange County to reckon with our nation's tragic history of racial violence. The Equal Justice Initiative was founded over 30 years ago in 1989 by our Executive Director, Mr. Brian Stevenson. It was in response to a crisis of counsel on Alabama's death row. At the time, 1/4 of all executions in the country were taking place in Alabama. But those condemned to die lacked even the most basic representation. In the decades since, EJI has continued its mission to represent people on death row, and we have been able to expand our work to provide assistance to children condemned to die in prison, people facing cruel and inhumane treatment, and many others who have been unfairly convicted or sentenced in America's criminal justice system. Yet, as we've continued our work challenging injustice inside the courtroom, we've also come to appreciate the need for change beyond the individual courts and prisons that we are representing, where we're representing our clients. Change in our country's narratives about the history of racial violence and injustice that has shaped the lives of Black Americans across generations, and changes in the landscape that surrounds us. We have not yet adequately acknowledged the destruction done by genocides of millions of indigenous people, by the enslavement of generations of kidnapped Africans and their descendants, and by the culture that tolerated over a century of racial terror lynchings, and by the vehemence with which so many resisted the tides of justice and clung to a system of segregation. More than a decade ago, EJI launched a public education project that focused on telling the truth about America's racial history. Through research, writing, and community partnerships, EJI works to document and memorialize the eras of enslavement, racial terror lynching, segregation, and mass incarceration. Our Community Remembrance Project is one way that we're able to work alongside community partners throughout the country who are taking on the challenging, necessary work of truth-telling about our history, which we believe will help to build a future rooted in justice. Through soil collections, historical markers, and racial justice essay contests, the Community Remembrance Project has helped communities across the nation reckon with tragic local histories of racial violence and unresolved trauma through public memorials and dialogue. The lynching of people like Manly McCauley was devastating to the rule of law, to the Black community, and to the justice quotient in America. Racial terror lynchings created toxins in communities that fuel bigotry, violence, and lawlessness. For too long, we have been silent about this history of racial violence and terror, and today, we're saying no more. Today we're saying no longer will we be silent. This marker challenge changes the landscape, but more importantly, it changes the identity of this community. You join a growing number of communities that are reckoning with the difficult histories. You are embracing the process of truth and justice, truth and reconciliation, and truth and repair that is essential for us to recover from a history of racial injustice. While much work remains to address the multiple ways that bias, bigotry, violence, and lawless discrimination still haunts us, we believe that if communities are encouraged enough to educate themselves about the multiple ways we've tolerated racial bigotry and violence, we can commit to a new era where we reject lawlessness and discrimination. EJI celebrates the work of everyone who has advanced this project and made the erection of this marker possible. To honor you, a duplicate marker will be placed at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. So people around the world will know that people in Orange County has taken a stance to advance truth and justice. Thank you all for this deeply dedicated organizers of this event and your leadership in the community as a whole. And we appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank everyone who's been a part of today's ceremony and your incredibly powerful words. I've really been honored to take them in. My name is Adrienne Nearday, and I have the pleasure of serving as the director of your North Carolina African American Heritage Commission. And again, I'm incredibly honored to take part in today's ceremony. I bring you greetings from our North Carolina African American Heritage Commissioners and the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. For those not familiar with us at the North Carolina African American Heritage Commission, we serve with a mission to preserve, protect, and promote North Carolina African American history, art, and culture for all people. We're a small team, and our work is broad. We work within the department and across the state, connecting and supporting folks who do all things African American history, art, and culture. Unfortunately, the story of racial terror lynching in our state is not limited to this community. From the mountains to the coast, most counties in our states have been touched by this history. And despite its long history, it is not something that we commonly discuss and learn about. It's a complicated history, and it is a tough history for many folks to think about, even still. But I cannot stress enough the importance of learning about it and its deep roots in North Carolina. To quote James Baldwin, "History does not refer merely or even principally to the past. On the contrary, the great force of history comes from the fact that we carry it within us, unconsciously controlled by it in many ways, and that history is literally present in all that we do." My hope today is that we are all able to find space to reflect and spend some time in community, but also deepen our understanding of those who came before us and their legacies. Thank you.
My remarks come first from Thomas Jefferson, who made the statement, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." I say that to say that we have a big part in what we have to do in trying to make sure that we right the wrong. Also, I would like to bring your attention to the book of Isaiah. It says that justice stands afar off and equity cannot enter because truth has fallen in the streets. It is important, very important, that we understand our truths. We are living in some very, very, very serious times right now. Very, very serious times. And in our living in these times, yesterday's keys won't work in today's locks.
Amen.
Many of us, according to Dr. Martin Luther King, have entered or have integrated into a burning fire. I'm going to say that again. We have integrated into a burning house, and if we're not careful, the whole country would burn. And last, in saying this, what good is it for us to have a white mind connected to a black body? I want to say that again. As we integrated into what whites have taught us, we have actually took on the problems of America because we have not learned our own history. We have not stood up for our own history. It has been forgotten. And it's up to us as a black people to bring it forward. We don't need white folks to tell us about our history. Before there was, we were. Before there were the annals of time, we were. And so I was asked the other day, well, my grandfather, I didn't have anything to do with slavery and lynching. It wasn't my problem. These are some of the answers of some of the younger white folks today. I didn't have anything to do with it. I didn't put you there. But let me say this to those who are young. You live deliciously of what your foreparents did yesterday. Moving forward, I ended with this. There's going to have to be a price to be paid. We have to be repaired. Whether it is land and money, we have to be repaired. And if the two races cannot come together as one, we must have our own. We must set aside land in the United States that we may be able to get together ourselves and do for ourselves instead of depending on white folks to do for us. There's not an endeavor in this nation that we haven't invented, that we haven't done, that we can't do for ourselves. And I tell you one last thing before I end it, because I want to thank my cousin, because I really was going to say a lot more, but he kind of, my cousin who's a minister kind of calmed me down. I said, brother, I don't think you want to go that way. So I'm being very careful of what I say. But I say this to say, for many of you white folks who are here, you go home and you teach your children that we owe black folks, even to the point of your life. Because these young brothers today ain't playing with no one. They'll take our life and your life. So we're saying that. I thank you for listening to me. I'll let my cousin say a little bit. I hope I didn't go too far into it.
Thank you. I would like to make a remark on what the gentleman said earlier, that Manly McCauley made a not so good decision. But keep in mind, he knew full well what would happen to him if he helped a white woman escape an abusive relationship. He paid for it with his life. None of us nowadays have a life-giving moment to push them forward until they're calling. And I would just like to say that if your life is not worth giving it up for somebody else, then your life ain't worth living. That's it.
I'm going to add to that because he said something. One more thing he said. Andre said to me, he said, look, he said, we need to seek God's favor. We need to seek God's face. And I'm going to say this because he came a long, long way. The scripture says, come out of her. Come out of her, that you might be partakers of her sins and of her ways, for her sins have reached unto heaven. It's a time of reckoning. We do or we die. Thank you.
Now can we see them? The marker?
Which way you want to go? Go up.
You say go up. Go up.
Who's behind
I know everyone wants a chance to read the marker, and it feels, I feel like the family's words in some way should be the last ones, because those are the most powerful and the most meaningful. But it is my job to close this out, and I want to note that it was many, many months of ritual that brought us to this day, and the role of ritual and how important it is in this act of remembrance. From the research to the soil collection, to getting the soil down to the museum, and bringing us here for the marker. All of that is really important and connected, and connects our community in Orange County to communities all over that have had these horrific acts happen and had lives cut short, and that cutting short has generational effects.
Yes.
And it is all of our job to stand with the family and to keep remembering. And we have this, and it's important, but our remembering and carrying that forward is our work now.
Right.
And I just keep thinking about what CJ said earlier. How do we live what we say?
Right.
And so that is what I hope that we will all take with us, because every choice we make today immediately becomes history. And I hope that we will all be thinking about how we want to be remembered in the future. Thanks for being here. And also, I feel awkward with saying some logistical items at the end, but there are these calendars available under the pavilion. Please take them home. There are also some refreshments and a little bit of eating and having a snack while we're in community together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.